All right, so we're going to talk about some of my more advanced, comprehensive thoughts here. I'd like to start off with some of the themes of the set. So in white-blue, we've got flying. In white-black, we've got life gain. And in red-green-blue, or teamer, we have elementals. Now, the thing that I'd like to mention about white-blue and white-black is that flying is already inherently good, and there aren't really flying creatures that you're playing in order to get the synergy that aren't already decent creatures. So you don't really need to focus on it per se. There's no really tribe thing going on there. With white, black, and life gain, it's almost the same thing. A lot of the things that are going to be gaining you life in those colors are also just fine, decent cards anyway. Cards with lifelink, cards that are flyers that give you some life, like Angel of Dawn, I think it was called. So basically the point is that you don't really need to try to make these happen. Now, red, green, blue, or teamer elementals, that you actually do have to try. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're deck building. And take a look, make sure that you notice all the elementals, like Frostlinks. You might have seen, oh, that's been reprinted a couple of times. Well, now it matters because it's an elemental. Although that card is also decent in the first place. So, basically elementals is the only one they have to try for. Green-white, the theme there is tokens, but here's the deal. In a pre-release, you're not really going to get that high amount of selectivity that you would in a draft, for example. So green-white tokens is a lot harder to pull off than these other things, and probably not something that you should be looking to play. Now, if you happen to open a perfect white-green tokens deck, sure, go for it, but this one excites me less than the other synergies. Next up, let's talk cards with protection. So we've got Apostle of Purifying Light, Cerulean Drake, Unchained Berserker, and Shifting Ceratops. These are the first four I want to talk about. For some reason, the one in green is rare, while the others are all uncommons, but whatever. Now, the point of these cards is that these four you can just play in your main deck because they're decent when they're not color hosing your opponent, and so they're not really a big drawback. They're just okay, right? Like a 2-1 for 2 with no other real good abilities, whatever, that's fine. But when these have protection come into play, they are one of the most important things on the board for so little mana. So these just become insane. So that's why you just play a main board, because they're decent enough when they don't do anything as far as the protection goes. But when the protection comes into play, it's a really huge deal. Now, Blight Beetle is the one card in this cycle that just doesn't justify its existence in the main board. It just doesn't do enough. But if it's color hosing them, you can bring it out of the sideboard, and it's again very, very strong. So it's not bad, but it's not good enough for the main board. Next, let's talk about some of the ridiculous cards that you should really be keeping an eye out for. So we've got Drakuseth, Mob Flames, and Rotting Regisar for our first two cards. Now, Drakuseth is just ridiculous. I mean, if you attack once with this card, you automatically win the game. It's pretty much impossible to lose when you attack with Drakuseth. It does 10 damage, spread out between, 3 different targets. And then you're also hitting them for 7 on top of that. I mean, it's basically impossible to lose if you attack with this card. If you see it in your pool, you should almost certainly be red. Now, Rotting Regisar is kind of interesting because this is just one of those unfun cards that just ends games immediately and nobody really gets to play. But you should be the person that's ending the game immediately and not letting your opponent play. The downside of this card, of course, is that if it gets pacified or something, you're just going to be discarding cards every turn, and that's a disaster. So it might be cool if you had some sack outlets to get rid of your Rotting Regisar if that happens, and definitely be willing to side it out against white-blue, for example. But the ceiling on how good this can be is just so high that I firmly believe that it should just be played. Next up, we've got Ajani, Strength of the Pride, Mu Yanling, Sky Dancer, and Vivian Arcbow Ranger. Now, all three of these are, Planeswalkers. They tend to be really good, and these aren't an exception to that. They're they're pretty darn amazing. A Johnny, he does everything that he needs on his own. You don't need to do anything to support him. Mu Yanling is a 3-drop. So this is like Rotting Regisaur. When you play it on turn 3 on the play, what is your opponent supposed to do about that? Of course, this will take a lot longer ending the game, but it'll end it just as well. Vivian Arcbow Ranger, it's got removal. It makes your creatures huge. Thing's sweet. Next up are 3 cards that you should always play, and those are Bag of Holding, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, and Meteor Golem. Now, always, it's a strong word, but Bag of Holding for 1 mana, you're really getting a lot of utility out of that thing. So Bag of Holding, it's very hard to imagine a deck that you don't play this. Golos, the thing that's interesting about him is you don't actually have to activate him for him to be good. Just getting that land into play is pretty sweet. Now, to be fair, if you are just straight 2-color, he is losing some of his appeal. So this is not always, and same with Meteor Golem. If you just have the most amazing deck ever and you don't need to play Meteor Golem at all, I guess maybe don't play him. But it's pretty hard to imagine opening such an amazing deck. Meteor Golem's really nice, and it also takes great care of all of those creatures with protection. If those are giving you trouble, Meteor Golem, well, you can't have protection against artifacts, can you? So, pretty much all 3 of these are almost always going to be auto-includes, especially Bag of Holding. So if you open them up, just be happy it makes your deck building a little easier. Alright, so next up is the section that I dread, which is the section where I say what cards to never, ever play. And the reason is people always like to come up with the fantasy scenarios where cards like this are amazing and all the potential, but generally they're just not giving you back enough for all the effort that you're putting into them, or they're just total zeros in all scenarios. So let's start. So you should never play the Ley Lines, Scheming Symmetry, Thought Distortion, and Rule of Law. Now, the Ley Lines, they all have relatively small effects. You have to put them in your deck in order for them to, do anything. And if they're not drawn on your opening hand, they're really bad. And most of them have really niche applications. The green one looks, that might be exciting. But actually, it just costs so much to activate and stuff. Not interested. Scheming Symmetry, you are paying mana and a card to give your opponent the absolute best card in their deck. And you don't really want to play the game of, I bet my bombiest bomb is better than your bombiest bomb, because that doesn't work out so often. Thought Distortion doesn't take creatures out of their hand, and is awful. Rule of Law is just nonsensical, and for Next up for cards to never play are Repeated Reverberation, Zephyr Charge, Diviner's Lockbox, and Renowned Weaponsmith. Now, Repeated Reverberation, I know, it looks so exciting, but it costs a lot in the first place. It could just be another spell, because when you have to wait to have enough mana to cast this and the spell that you want to copy, right? That's already going to be a huge amount of mana, and you actually have to have both at the same time. You might be forced to play your awesome kill spell like Murder earlier so you don't die. Now you've just got a Repeated Reverberation in your hand. It's terrible. Next up, Zephyr Charge. Card just doesn't do enough. Just giving creatures flying that you have to keep on paying mana would be awful. I would prefer if this was just all creatures you control have flying forever and just pay way more mana or something. This is just not awesome. Diviner's Lockbox. I guess the joke here is that you just name your most frequent basic land and keep on trying to hit it. But the fact is that you're paying a decent amount for the lockbox in the first place, and then you just never know when you're going to actually hit. And you just, awful. Renowned Weaponsmith looks like it could be okay, but the fact is that the cards that it goes in grabs are kind of crappy. So what happens is you're putting a kind of crappy card to go find your other kind of crappy cards, and it's just not worth all the hassle. If you draw them out of order and you get some of your Vials of Dragonfire first, for example, and then you get the Renowned Weaponsmith, well, now your deck, it's bad. So just don't play the Weaponsmith, or in fact the things that he fetches either. They're not good enough. Lastly, let's talk about the very specific 5 sideboard cards: Devout Decree, Aether Gust, Fry, Noxious Grasp, and Veil of Summer. Now, all of these, kind of, you get what they do on their own, and the question is, are they all good enough to bring in against these colors? And the easy answer is yes. Bring them all in if your opponent is touching one of these colors, because they're very good. Veil of Summer looks pretty bad. Here's the deal, though. You can just cycle it if you want to be super mana efficient. And later in the game, what you can do with Veil of Summer is you can wait for them to, for example, cast a removal spell. Then you Veil of Summer. Then you draw a card. Their spell fizzles. It's very, very, very efficient. And yeah, so that's how you play that one. Basically, just play these guys. They're all good. Alright, well that's all I gotta say for now about M20. Looks like a fun set. Enjoy yourselves at the pre-release. If you like this video, give that like button a hit. If you want to see more, of course, you can subscribe. And as always, I'll see you next video.